Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves not tucked in our cozy beds, but transported back to ancient Rome. Feel the scorching Mediterranean sun on your skin, hear the clang of gladiatorial combat echoing in the distance, smell the, well, let's just say ancient Rome wasn't known for its sanitation. You're stepping into a world where the law wasn't just a set of rules, but a dramatic performance. A world where justice could be swift, brutal, and, you probably won't survive this, because the chance of accidentally insulting a senator alone could land you in some serious trouble. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the bustling Roman Forum, the heart of the city. Senators in their crisp togas argue loudly about grain prices. Merchants hawk their wares, everything from imported silks to questionable-looking sausages. A stray dog sniffs at your sandals. You're here, like many others, to witness a trial. A public spectacle, really. Roman justice wasn't just about determining guilt or innocence. It was about reaffirming the power of the state. Think of it as the ultimate reality TV show, except instead of fake drama and manufactured tears, you get real consequences, maybe even a thumbs down followed by, well, you get the picture. The accused is a baker, apparently caught selling loaves that were underweight. A serious offense, according to the edicts. You can feel the tension in the air. The crowd murmurs, some eager for punishment, others showing a flicker of sympathy. After all, everyone has to eat, right? You elbow your way closer, trying to get a better view of the praetor, the magistrate presiding over the case. He's a stern-looking man, his face etched with the gravity of his position. He adjusts his toga, a subtle signal that the proceedings are about to begin. The prosecution, a sharp-tongued orator hired by the state, begins his case. He paints the baker as a greedy cheat, undermining the very foundations of Roman society. Every word drips with righteous indignation. He accuses the baker of contributing to the rising food prices and potentially even causing civil unrest. You listen, captivated by his skill with words. He's a master of manipulation, turning a simple act of petty theft into a crime against the Republic. The defense lawyer, looking considerably less polished than his counterpart, steps forward. He argues that the baker is a hard-working man, struggling to make ends meet in a difficult economy. Maybe his scales were off, he suggests. Maybe it was an honest mistake. He appeals to the jury's sense of compassion. After all, everyone makes mistakes, right? It's a more subdued performance, but you can sense the underlying desperation. The baker's fate hangs in the balance. Historians still argue whether Roman legal proceedings were truly fair or just a thinly veiled way to control the populace. The Roman legal system was surprisingly sophisticated for its time. They had written laws, the famous 12 tables, and a complex system of courts and appeals. They even had lawyers, though their reputation wasn't always the best. One could say they were ahead of their time, with some of the fundamental principles of Roman law still influencing modern legal systems. Of course, things were a little different back then. Evidence was often based on hearsay, and bribery was, let's just say, not uncommon. You watch as the jurors, a group of respected citizens, deliberate. They're clearly taking the matter seriously, whispering amongst themselves, their faces etched with concentration. You try to read their expressions, but it's impossible to tell which way they're leaning. You wonder if they're swayed by the orator's fiery rhetoric or the defense lawyer's plea for mercy. Or perhaps they simply want to get home for dinner. That reminds you, you are starting to get hungry yourself. Maybe you'll grab a thermopolium snack after this is all over. They're the ancient Roman equivalent of fast food joints. The praetor calls the court to order. The jury delivers its verdict, guilty. A gasp ripples through the crowd. The baker's face falls. You almost feel sorry for him, until you remember that underweight bread is, like, totally unacceptable. Just kidding, mostly. But in the eyes of the Republic, he's a criminal. The praetor pronounces the sentence. The baker will be fined, publicly flogged, and his bakery shut down for a month. A harsh punishment, you think, but perhaps a necessary deterrent. But here's where things get a little quirky. Did you know that sometimes, punishments were tailored to fit the crime in rather imaginative ways? For example, a fraudulent wine merchant might be forced to drink a barrel of his own watered-down plunk. Talk about a bad hangover. The execution of the sentence is swift and public. You wince as the baker is led away to the whipping post. The crowd cheers and jeers. It's a brutal spectacle, a stark reminder of the power of the state. You feel a knot of unease in your stomach. This isn't some detached legal process, it's raw and visceral. But the baker's case is far from the only one to be adjudicated today. Next up is a dispute between two chariot racing teams. Turns out, the owner of the red team accuses the owner of the blue team of sabotaging his horses. Chariot racing was a massive sport in Rome, with huge sums of money and enormous egos involved. Think Formula 1, but with more horses and a significantly higher chance of death. The fans were fiercely loyal to their teams, and riots were not uncommon. One wrong call by the referee, or in this case, the praetor, and you could have a full-blown civil war on your hands. The two chariot owners are brought before the praetor, each shouting accusations and denials. The air is thick with tension. The crowd is even more animated than before, chanting the names of their favorite teams. You find yourself caught up in the excitement, even though you don't even know which team you're supposed to be supporting. Should you go with the red team? Or the blue team? You decide to stay neutral. You've seen enough to know that getting involved in Roman politics is a recipe for disaster. The praetor, looking increasingly exasperated, tries to restore order. He calls for witnesses. Several stable hands are brought forward, each offering contradictory accounts of what happened. You can't tell who's telling the truth and who's lying. Everyone seems to have their own agenda. Roman trials weren't always about finding the truth, they were often about power, influence, and who had the best connections. The praetor, realizing that he's not going to get to the bottom of the matter, decides to take a different approach. He suggests a compromise. The two chariot owners will share the prize money from the next race. They will also publicly apologize to each other. It's a Solomonic solution, designed to appease both sides and prevent further bloodshed. The crowd seems satisfied. The chariot owners, reluctantly, agree to the terms. The praetor bangs his gavel, and the case is closed. Justice, Roman style, has been served. In a way. You start to walk away from the forum, reflecting on what you've witnessed. Roman justice was a complex and often contradictory system. It could be fair and impartial, but it could also be cruel and arbitrary. It was a reflection of Roman society itself, a society of great achievements and terrible injustices. And remember, even a random sneeze in the Senate at the wrong time could be considered treason, so it was best to tread lightly. All this drama has made you even more tired than before, ready for your own, less chaotic, bed. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's dim the lights just a touch. Feel that? Nice and cozy. You trudge along the dusty Appian Way, the Roman sun beating down on your neck. It's hot. Uncomfortably hot. The kind of hot that makes you question all your life choices, like maybe you should have just stayed home and perfected your olive oil-based skincare routine. Which, by the way, was totally a thing back then. Romans loved their olive oil, not just for cooking, but for everything. Shampoo, moisturizer, even, personal lubricant. Don't worry, we won't dwell on that image. You're headed towards the Forum, the heart of Rome, a bustling, chaotic mess of merchants, politicians, and, well, pigeons. Lots and lots of pigeons. Imagine Times Square, but with togas and the distinct aroma of unwashed bodies and, you guessed it, pigeon droppings. Lovely. You can almost smell it, can't you? The sweat, the spices, the faint whiff of injustice hanging in the air. Because today, we're not here to admire the architecture or debate the merits of Roman plumbing, though, let's be honest, their aqueducts were pretty darn impressive. No, today we're diving headfirst into something a little darker. Something a little more primal. We're talking about Lex Talionis. Now, Lex Talionis. Roll it around on your tongue. Latin sounds so much more imposing than eye for an eye, doesn't it? It just sounds important. And in a way, it was. This ancient legal principle, found not just in Rome but across the ancient world, essentially boiled down to this: if you hurt someone, you get hurt in the same way. Pretty straightforward, right? Think of it as the original, you break it, you buy it, policy, only instead of a vase, it's, someone's face. But before you start picturing a bunch of Romans gleefully gouging each other's eyes out, and honestly, there probably was some of that, let's try to understand the context. Early Rome wasn't exactly known for its nuanced legal system. We're talking about a society still figuring out the whole civilized thing. No fancy courts, no legions of lawyers. Just you. And the person you've wronged. And maybe a very grumpy paterfamilias with a lot of power. The paterfamilias, the head of the household, held immense sway. He had control over his entire family, even his adult children. Think of him as the ancient Roman CEO of Family Incorporated, with the power to make life or death decisions. It was a system. Whether it was a good one is, naturally, something historians still argue whether to this very day. But back to revenge. So, someone steals your prized chariot, a major offense, by the way, that's like stealing someone's Tesla today. Under Lex Talionis, you're entitled to steal their chariot back. Or, if you're feeling particularly vindictive, maybe even disable it with a strategically placed rock. Just kidding. Mostly. But the point is, the punishment was supposed to be equivalent to the crime. It was a way to prevent endless cycles of violence. An attempt, at least. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit: while the eye for an eye principle is the most famous aspect of Lex Talionis, it wasn't always applied literally. Imagine trying to administer justice based purely on physical retaliation. What if the perpetrator was blind? Or missing a limb? Things get complicated fast. Instead, what often happened was negotiation. The injured party, or their family, would demand compensation from the offender. This could take the form of money, goods, or even labor. Think of it as ancient Roman community service, only with a much higher risk of getting stabbed. This system of compensation highlights a crucial element of Lex Talionis: it wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring balance. It was about making the victim whole again, or at least as whole as possible, given the circumstances. But you're probably wondering, okay, so what if you did actually take an eye for an eye? Did that ever happen? And the answer, my friend, is, probably. While monetary compensation was common, especially as Roman society became more complex, there were undoubtedly instances where the principle of literal retaliation was applied. Especially in cases involving serious bodily harm. Imagine you're a Roman farmer, toiling away in your field, trying to eke out a living. Some jerk comes along and steals your ox. Your only ox. Now you can't plow your field, and you and your family are going to starve. You track down the thief, and, well, let's just say things might get a little agricultural. A pitchfork might be involved. Metaphorically, of course. We're just painting a picture here. Which brings us to the slightly uncomfortable truth about Lex Talionis: it was a system that often favored the wealthy and powerful. If you were rich, you could afford to pay a hefty sum to avoid physical retaliation. If you were poor, well, good luck explaining to the guy you accidentally tripped that you really didn't mean to break his nose. You were probably going to end up with a broken nose of your own. And maybe a missing tooth. The inherent inequality of the system is something that historians still argue about. Was it truly a form of justice, or just another way for the rich to exploit the poor? It's a debate that continues to this day. One thing that's certain is that Lex Talionis gradually faded away as Roman law evolved. Over time, the state took a more active role in administering justice, establishing courts and legal codes. By the time of the Roman Empire, Lex Talionis was largely replaced by a more centralized system of punishment. But its influence can still be seen in later legal traditions, including the concept of retribution. However, as you might expect, the transition was not smooth. Think of it this way: for centuries, people had been accustomed to settling scores themselves. Now, suddenly, they were expected to trust the government to do it for them. And let's be honest, governments aren't always known for their efficiency or fairness. There were bound to be some growing pains. Imagine you're a Roman citizen who's been wronged. You go to the authorities to report the crime, expecting swift and decisive action. But instead, you're met with bureaucratic red tape, endless delays, and a legion of lawyers who seem more interested in arguing semantics than in actually helping you. You'd probably be tempted to take matters into your own hands, wouldn't you? I mean, who needs a court when you have a gladius and a burning desire for revenge? Please note, I am not advocating violence. This is purely hypothetical. Unless, nah, I'm kidding. This tension between personal revenge and state-administered justice is a recurring theme in Roman history. It's a reminder that even the most sophisticated legal systems are ultimately built on human foundations. And humans, as we all know, are prone to, well, being human. With all the flaws and imperfections that entails. Now, for a fringe tidbit, some scholars argue that the Roman fascination with gladiatorial combat was, in part, a reflection of this ongoing struggle with Lex Talionis. The arena became a place where people could witness the ultimate expression of personal revenge, but within a controlled and sanctioned environment. It was a way to channel those primal urges without disrupting the social order, too much, anyway. A bit like watching a particularly violent hockey game, really. It's cathartic. Of course, there's the counterargument that it was just good entertainment. But hey, where's the fun in that? So, there you have it, friend. A brief glimpse into the world of Lex Talionis. A world where justice was often raw, immediate, and, well, a little bit terrifying. But also, in its own strange way, a world where people were held accountable for their actions. A world where the price of hurting someone was, well, let's just say it wasn't cheap. Especially if you happen to be short on cash. And as you continue your stroll through the forum, dodging pigeons and inhaling the fragrant aromas of ancient Rome, maybe you'll spare a thought for those who lived and died under the rule of Lex Talionis. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be a little bit grateful that we live in a world where justice, however imperfect, is, usually, administered by someone other than the person you accidentally spilled wine on at dinner. Unless, did you spill wine on someone recently? Just checking. Sleep well, friend. You trudge through the bustling Roman forum, the cacophony of sounds washing over you. Merchants hawk their wares, senators debate with theatrical flair, and the ever-present rumble of chariot wheels on cobblestone threatens to swallow your own thoughts. The midday sun beats down, turning your tunic into a sticky second skin. You dab at your brow with a bit of linen you'd stuffed into your pocket, or, loculus, if you want to be authentic, wishing you'd thought to grab a parasol. Or, invented air conditioning. This toga life is not as glamorous as they make it look in the movies. Today, you're on a less than pleasant errand. You've heard whispers, snippets of hushed conversations, about a public flogging scheduled to take place near the Temple of Jupiter. Curiosity, morbid as it may be, has gotten the better of you. You push through the throng, the scent of incense and sewage battling for dominance in your nostrils, until you catch sight of a makeshift platform erected in the center of the square. A small crowd has already gathered, a motley assortment of citizens, curious onlookers, hardened veterans, and perhaps even a few individuals who derive a disturbing pleasure from the spectacle. You find a spot near the back, craning your neck to get a better view. Historians still argue whether the Roman fascination with public punishment stemmed from a desire for justice, a need for social control, or simply a good old-fashioned dose of bloodlust. Probably a little of each, if we're being honest. A hush falls over the crowd as a stern-faced lictor, a kind of Roman bodyguard/enforcer, strides onto the platform. He's clad in a scarlet tunic and carries a bundle of fasces, rods bound together with an axe, symbolizing the power of the Roman state. You notice a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Even wielding authority under the scorching sun can be a drag, huh? Following the lictor is the condemned. He's a disheveled-looking man, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt. His eyes dart nervously around the crowd, a mixture of fear and defiance flickering within them. You can't help but wonder what he did to deserve this. Was it theft? Sedition? Perhaps he simply forgot to pay his taxes. In ancient Rome, even a minor offense could land you in a world of pain. Or, well, more pain. He's roughly shoved towards a wooden post, his hands bound tightly behind him. He struggles for a moment, but his captors are too strong. His bare back is exposed to the sun, a canvas waiting for the artist's cruel brushstrokes. A burly figure steps forward, the Carnifex, the executioner. He's a formidable sight, his arms thick with muscle and his face impassive. He carries a flagrum, a type of whip consisting of leather thongs studded with bone or metal fragments. You swallow hard, a sudden dryness in your throat. This is about to get unpleasant. The lictor reads out the charges against the condemned man, something about stealing a loaf of bread from a wealthy merchant. The crowd murmurs its approval, a collective sense of righteousness washing over them. You wince. A loaf of bread? Surely there are other ways to deal with that. Perhaps a stern talking to. A strongly worded letter. Maybe a timeout. The Carnifex raises the flagrum. The silence is deafening. You can hear the chirping of cicadas in the distance, the rustling of leaves in the nearby trees. Then, the first lash falls. A sharp crack echoes through the square. The condemned man cries out, his body jerking with the impact. A thin line of red appears on his back, quickly widening into a bloody welt. The crowd gasps, a mixture of horror and excitement rippling through their ranks. You avert your eyes, your stomach churning. The Carnifex continues his work, each lash landing with brutal precision. The condemned man's cries grow weaker, his body slumping against the post. You notice a small boy in the crowd, his eyes wide with fascination. You hope someone will explain to him later that there is such thing as the concept of empathy, you know. The number of lashes had been predetermined by the court, and the Carnifex continues with grim efficiency. The man's back is now a bloody mess, a grotesque tapestry of lacerations and bruises. You can smell the coppery tang of blood in the air. You close your eyes, trying to block out the sounds and the smells. According to some fringe historical theories, certain gladiatorial contests incorporated a ritualistic form of flagellation, believed to purify the fighter and enhance their strength. Which, you know, seems counterintuitive to you. But hey, what do you know? You're just a time-traveling tourist with a mild case of historical anxiety. The flogging finally comes to an end. The Carnifex steps back, his face betraying no emotion. The condemned man hangs limply against the post, barely conscious. His body is a testament to the brutality of Roman justice. The lictor pronounces the sentence complete. The crowd begins to disperse, their curiosity satisfied. You watch as two guards roughly cut the man down from the post and drag him away. You wonder what will become of him. Will he survive his wounds? Will he ever be able to lead a normal life again? You linger in the square for a moment, the image of the flogging seared into your memory. The sun still beats down mercilessly, but you now feel a chill deep inside. You realize that beneath the grandeur and the glory of ancient Rome lies a darker side, a world of violence and oppression. You turn and walk away, your steps heavier than before. You need a drink. And maybe a long nap. And perhaps a strong dose of modern-day antibiotics. And definitely a vacation from all this time-traveling drama. As you navigate the bustling streets, you can't help but ponder the complexities of Roman society. Public floggings were a common occurrence, a stark reminder of the power of the state and the consequences of disobedience. But they also served as a form of entertainment, a spectacle that drew crowds and fueled the Roman appetite for violence. Historians still argue whether the frequency and severity of these punishments reflected a fundamental flaw in Roman society or were simply a necessary means of maintaining order in a vast and often unruly empire. You pass a bakery, the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. You remember the condemned man, his crime apparently being the theft of a loaf. The irony is almost too much to bear. You buy a loaf yourself, a small act of defiance against the injustice you witnessed. You munch on it as you walk, the taste strangely bitter in your mouth. As you reach your temporary lodgings, a surprisingly comfortable inn with surprisingly clean sheets, you decide to indulge in a bit of historical escapism. You pull out a set of dice you brought with you, because who travels without dice, and settle in for a game of Alea, a popular Roman pastime. Maybe rolling the dice will help you forget the horrors you witnessed today. Or at least distract you until dinner. But even as you roll, the image of the flogging lingers in your mind. The crack of the whip, the cries of the condemned man, the blood-soaked back. It's a reminder that even in the most civilized of societies, darkness can always be found lurking beneath the surface. And you, my friend, just got a front row seat to the show. I bet you're just thrilled. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go find a good therapist. And maybe invest in a time machine that only travels to happy places. Like, you know, a chocolate factory. Or a puppy farm. Anywhere but here, frankly. Alright, friend, come closer. Just nestle in, make yourself comfortable. We've got a doozy ahead of us. A real doozy. Not the kind you'd want to encounter after a long day, maybe with a cup of chamomile. More like the kind that involves sharp teeth, roaring, and, well, let's just say minimal personal space. You trudge forward, the midday sun a brutal weight on your shoulders. It beats down on the sand of the arena, each grain shimmering like a tiny, mocking mirror. The air hangs thick and heavy with the smells of sweat, anticipation, and something else, something feral and faintly unpleasant. It's the aroma of unwashed animals, the earthy tang of dried blood, and maybe a hint of lion drool. Yep. Definitely lion drool. The crowd, a sea of faces both excited and strangely detached, roars as you are led to the center of the arena. You are, of course, playing the role of the condemned. Maybe you were a particularly bad tax collector. Or, heavens forbid, a Christian in the wrong place at the wrong time. We don't judge here. We just observe. The Damnatio ad Bestias, or condemnation to beasts, awaits. It's a particularly flamboyant form of capital punishment favored by the Romans. Mainstream historical fact, it wasn't just for criminals. Sometimes it was used for deserters, runaway slaves, and those deemed enemies of the state. Talk about a rough day at the office. They say the Romans were all about spectacle. They wanted to feel something, to be entertained. And what's more entertaining than watching someone get devoured by a hungry animal? Morbid, sure, but hey, different times, right? Although, if we're honest, reality TV is basically the same thing with slightly less fur and a whole lot more Botox. You glance around. The arena itself is massive, a sprawling oval of sand and stone. The seating rises steeply, creating a dizzying sense of scale. You can practically feel the weight of 1,000 eyes boring into you. It's the kind of pressure that makes you want to blurt out your deepest, darkest secrets. You suppress the urge to confess to stealing cookies from the cookie jar when you were 8. Nobody needs to know that. Now, about those beasts. They're not just any old house cats, my friend. We're talking lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Sometimes even more exotic creatures like crocodiles or ostriches were thrown into the mix. Talk about a diverse dinner menu. I mean, can you imagine having to train an ostrich to, well, you know. That's a mental image I'm not sure I can handle right now. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some scholars believe that animals used in the arena were sometimes deliberately starved for days beforehand to increase their aggression. Charming, right? Makes you appreciate your takeout pizza a little bit more, doesn't it? The gate creaks open with a sound that chills you to the bone. From the dark depths emerges a lion. A magnificent beast, all muscle and mane, its eyes gleaming with primal hunger. It saunters into the arena, surveying its domain with a lazy confidence. It stretches, yawns, and then, it sees you. Its gaze locks on you, and a low growl rumbles in its chest. The crowd erupts in cheers. The moment of truth has arrived. You might be thinking, well, this is it. Curtains. Game over. But hold on. Not so fast. You remember hearing stories of gladiators who managed to fight off wild animals. Of course, they were trained warriors with swords and shields. You, on the other hand, are wearing, well, let's just say your outfit isn't exactly combat ready. Linen tunics are notoriously poor protection against lion claws. Historians still argue whether the condemned were given any real chance of survival. Some say it was a straight-up execution, a brutal spectacle designed to intimidate the masses. Others believe there was a slight possibility of redemption, a chance to prove your worth in the face of death. Maybe if you managed to kill the animal, you'd be spared. Or maybe, just maybe, someone in the crowd would be impressed enough to petition for your release. Don't get your hopes up, though. The lion begins to circle you, its eyes never leaving yours. It's playing with its food, savoring the moment. You try to stay calm, but your heart is pounding in your chest like a trapped bird. You take a deep breath. Time to think. Time to strategize. Time to, well, probably time to die. You glance around frantically for anything that could be used as a weapon. A rock. A discarded sandal. A particularly sharp-looking clump of dirt. No such luck. You are completely unarmed. Well, except for your wits. And your surprisingly extensive knowledge of obscure animal facts. You wonder if reciting the scientific classification of the lion would somehow deter it. Probably not. But then, you remember something. A story you once heard about lions and mirrors. Apparently, they're not too keen on their own reflections. It's a territorial thing, maybe. You close your eyes, trying to picture the inside of your, oh, right, no pockets. No mirrors. Dang it. The lion lets out another roar, this one much closer. It's getting impatient. You can feel its hot breath on your face. You close your eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, something unexpected happens. A small child, perched on their father's shoulders in the front row, drops their teddy bear. Yes, it's a teddy bear. A slightly tattered, one-eared teddy bear. And it lands right in front of you. The lion pauses, its eyes narrowing. It stares at the teddy bear, then at you, then back at the teddy bear. It seems confused. I mean, you would be too, right? You're expecting a nice juicy snack, and instead, you get a fluffy brown thing with button eyes. You seize the opportunity. You grab the teddy bear and hold it out in front of you, like a tiny, furry shield. The lion takes a tentative step back. It sniffs the air, then lets out a small, almost whimper-like sound. This is where things get really weird. Apparently, lions have a soft spot for teddy bears. Or maybe this particular lion had a traumatic experience involving a teddy bear as a cub. Who knows? Either way, it's working. The lion seems genuinely unsettled by the presence of this cuddly interloper. You start to back away slowly, still holding the teddy bear out in front of you. The lion follows you, its gaze fixed on the bear. It's like you're leading it on a walk. A very tense, very surreal walk. Okay, light joke time. What do you call a lion wearing a tiny hat? A dandelion. The crowd is silent, utterly bewildered by what they're witnessing. This isn't exactly the gladiatorial combat they paid for. This is something else. Something ridiculous. Now, let's move on to an extremely niche piece of historical information. I heard somewhere, and I can't for the life of me remember where, that there were laws dictating the minimum size requirements for arena animals. Can you imagine being the poor soul assigned to measure the circumference of a lion's mane? Talk about a stressful job. You reach the edge of the arena, near one of the gates. It's your chance to escape. You turn and run, still clutching the teddy bear. The lion hesitates for a moment, then lets out a frustrated roar and turns away. It seems to have lost interest in you. Or maybe it's just embarrassed. You stumble through the gate, collapsing on the ground in a heap. You're alive. You actually survived the Damnatio ad Bestias. And you owe it all to a teddy bear. You lie there for a moment, catching your breath, trying to process what just happened. You glance at the teddy bear. Its button eyes seem to be staring back at you, filled with silent gratitude. You smile. You've made a new friend. A slightly tattered, one-eared friend who just saved your life. But let's be honest, my friend, your chances of surviving that ordeal were probably astronomically low. And even if you did somehow manage to escape, your life would likely be forever changed. You'd be haunted by the memory of those razor-sharp claws, that hot, fetid breath. You'd probably develop a crippling fear of stuffed animals. But hey, at least you'd have a good story to tell. Right? And that, my friend, is the rather gruesome, yet surprisingly silly, tale of Damnatio ad Bestias. Pleasant dreams. Okay, settle in, friend. Get comfy. Maybe grab a blanket, some herbal tea. We're about to dive into a topic that's, well, not exactly cozy, but certainly, fascinating. Crucifixion. Yeah, that one. The Roman special. Buckle up, buttercups. You trudge along a dusty Roman road. The sun beats down, relentless. The air hangs thick with the scent of, well, a lot of things, and none of them particularly pleasant. Think sweat, unwashed bodies, animal dung, and a faint metallic tang that you can't quite place. It's just another day in the empire, right? But today's different. There's a palpable tension in the air. People are whispering, pointing, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. You crane your neck and see it. In the distance, against the harsh glare of the sky, 3 figures are silhouetted against the horizon. 3 crosses. Your stomach clenches. You know what's happening. Everyone knows. It's not exactly a surprise party. This isn't just any execution, this is crucifixion, the Roman Empire's ultimate deterrent, a brutal spectacle designed to crush dissent and remind everyone who's in charge. Public executions were, so their thing. Think of it as reality TV, but way less entertaining, and with significantly fewer sponsored product placements. You inch closer, drawn in by the awful gravity of the scene. You can hear the rasping breaths of the condemned, the jeers of the crowd, the rhythmic thud of hammers as Roman soldiers make adjustments. This wasn't a quick, clean affair. That was the point. Mainstream historical fact, crucifixion was used by many ancient cultures, not just the Romans. The Persians, Phoenicians, and even the Assyrians employed similar methods of execution long before Rome came into power. So, technically, the Romans were just borrowing a pre-existing idea. Like flared jeans. Quirky tidbit, some scholars believe that the nails used in crucifixions weren't always driven through the hands, but rather through the wrists. The reasoning? The hands alone might not be strong enough to support the weight of the body. Imagine finding that out the hard way. Historians still argue whether crucifixions were always carried out with nails. Some evidence suggests that ropes were sometimes used instead, binding the condemned to the cross. Less metal, more rope burn. Yea. You watch, mesmerized and horrified, as the soldiers taunt the victims. They're stripped naked, exposed to the elements and the scorn of the crowd. Humiliation was part of the punishment. Breaking a man's spirit was just as important as breaking his body. The slow, agonizing process would take hours, sometimes even days. Dehydration, exhaustion, exposure, and ultimately, asphyxiation. A truly terrible cocktail of suffering. Your gaze lingers on one figure. He's younger than the others, his face gaunt and streaked with blood and sweat. His eyes, though filled with pain, seem to hold a strange sense of acceptance. Or maybe that's just the sun playing tricks on you. You can't help but wonder what he did to end up here. Was he a rebel? A thief? A political agitator? Did he really deserve this? Mainstream historical fact: crucifixion was typically reserved for slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state. Roman citizens were usually exempt from this form of punishment. You had to really mess up to get the crucifixion treatment if you were a Roman citizen. Like, betray the entire empire kind of mess up. Quirky tidbit: there's a story, possibly apocryphal, so take it with a grain of salt, that Roman soldiers sometimes played a game called Crucify the Mosquito. They would catch mosquitoes and crucify them on tiny wooden crosses. Talk about taking your frustrations out on the little guy. Historians still argue whether all crucifixions were identical in their execution. Did the height of the cross vary? Were the victims always nailed in the same way? Were there different styles of crucifixion, depending on the crime or the executioner? It seems like there was a certain amount of improvisation involved. Like a really bad cooking show. The crowd is a mix of emotions. Some are openly mocking the condemned, reveling in their suffering. Others are silent, their faces etched with pity or fear. Still others are simply bored. For them, this is just another spectacle, a break from the monotony of daily life. It's the Roman equivalent of binge-watching a true crime documentary. You notice a woman weeping quietly in the crowd. She clutches a small child to her breast, shielding their eyes from the horror. You wonder if she knows one of the condemned. A wife? A mother? A sister? The thought sends a chill down your spine. Mainstream historical fact: the Romans used crucifixion as a tool of political control. It was a way to maintain order and suppress rebellion. By publicly executing criminals in such a brutal and humiliating way, they hoped to deter others from challenging their authority. Think of it as the ultimate power move. Quirky tidbit: the Romans even had a god of crucifixion. His name was, well, actually, they didn't. But if they did, what would they call him? Crucius? Mortis? The possibilities are endless, and slightly disturbing. I'm going with Crucius, sounds like a Harry Potter curse gone wrong. Historians still argue whether the use of crucifixion ultimately backfired on the Romans. Did it actually deter crime and rebellion, or did it simply breed resentment and hatred? Did the spectacle of public suffering ultimately erode the authority of the empire? It's hard to say for sure, but there's definitely a case to be made that it wasn't exactly a great PR strategy. As the hours drag on, the condemned grow weaker. Their bodies sag, their breathing becomes shallow and labored. The sun continues to beat down, intensifying their suffering. Flies buzz around their wounds, drawn to the blood and sweat. The smell of death becomes overpowering. You can practically taste it. You try to imagine what it must be like to be up there, hanging naked under the scorching sun, knowing that death is inevitable but agonizingly slow in coming. The pain, the thirst, the humiliation, the sheer terror of it all, it's almost too much to comprehend. You feel a wave of nausea wash over you. Mainstream historical fact: victims of crucifixion often died from asphyxiation. The position of the body made it difficult to breathe, and eventually, they would suffocate. It's like trying to do yoga while someone is sitting on your chest. Not exactly relaxing. Quirky tidbit: some historians believe that the Roman soldiers sometimes offered the crucified a drink of posca, a mixture of sour wine and water, as a form of, well, not mercy, exactly, but perhaps a way to prolong their suffering. Kind of like offering someone a band-aid after they've been run over by a chariot. Historians still argue whether the Romans had a standardized protocol for crucifixions. Were there specific rules regarding the type of wood used for the cross, the size of the nails, the duration of the suffering? Or was it all just left to the discretion of the executioners? Probably the latter. Bureaucracy wasn't quite as advanced back then. You avert your eyes, unable to watch any longer. You turn and walk away, the image of the crucified men seared into your memory. The scene replays in your mind, over and over again. You can't shake the feeling of horror and revulsion. And the nagging question: what did they do to deserve such a terrible fate? The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. You know that the suffering of the crucified will continue throughout the night. You can't help but wonder if anyone will remember them in the morning. Or will they just be forgotten, another footnote in the long and bloody history of the Roman Empire? The road ahead stretches out before you, long and uncertain. You trudge onward, your heart heavy with the weight of what you have witnessed. The world seems a little darker now, a little more brutal, a little more unforgiving. You can't shake the feeling that you've just seen a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human soul. And it wasn't pretty. No, sir. It wasn't pretty at all. Sleep tight. You are going to need it. You trudge along the dusty Appian Way. Each footfall kicks up a small cloud, coating your sandals and the hem of your tunic with a fine layer of ochre. The sun, that relentless Roman sun, beats down on you, heavy and unforgiving. It feels as if even the gods are conspiring to speed you along your unwanted journey. You're leaving Rome. Not for a holiday, not for business, but because Rome no longer wants you. It stings, doesn't it? To be deemed unworthy of the city that supposedly represents the pinnacle of civilization. You, a citizen, reduced to, well, what are you now? An exile. A persona non grata. Someone to be forgotten, erased from the annals of Roman society. Try not to dwell on it too much, though. The road is long, and you'll need your energy. Your crime. Ah, that's a sticky wicket, isn't it? Maybe you crossed a powerful politician, perhaps you whispered treasonous thoughts a little too loudly in the baths, or perhaps you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Whatever it was, the wheels of Roman justice, or perhaps injustice, have turned, and here you are, banished. Remember that party last month? Yeah, the one where you had a little too much Falernian wine and started doing that impression of the Emperor Tiberius? Hindsight is 20/20, my friend. Turns out, the guy laughing the loudest was a Praetorian guard in disguise. Rookie mistake. Deportation and exile were, as you are probably now acutely aware, rather common occurrences in Roman society. It wasn't always reserved for the biggies, like emperors who maybe, just maybe, weren't entirely popular. Although Augustus was the one who codified exile into law, he certainly wasn't the first to use it as a political tool. Think of Cicero, banished for his role in the execution of the Catalan conspirators. Or Ovid, exiled by Augustus for reasons that remain shrouded in scandalous speculation, something about a poem and a mistake, which sounds like a pretty wild Friday night if you ask me. Historians still argue whether Ovid's exile was truly due to his poetry or whether he knew too much about some imperial indiscretion. Either way, he ended up in Tomies, on the Black Sea, which, from all accounts, was not exactly Rome's answer to the Riviera. The thing about Roman exile is that it came in different flavors, like artisanal gelato. There was relegatio, which was essentially a forced relocation to a specific place, often with your property intact. Think of it as a really long, unwanted vacation. Then there was deportatio in insulum, which was far more severe. This meant banishment to an island, often with the confiscation of your property. You were essentially stripped of your citizenship and your livelihood. And then there was the nuclear option, interdictio aquae et ignis, which meant you were outlawed, forbidden fire and water, and anyone who helped you was also liable to punishment. Essentially, you became a ghost, a non-person. Thankfully, you didn't get that one. You still have your water bottle, right? The Romans, you see, had a real thing for the idea of urbs, the city. To be Roman was to belong to Rome, to participate in its culture, its politics, its life. To be exiled was to be cut off from all of that, to be cast adrift in a world that suddenly felt very, very foreign. You're now discovering this firsthand. The weight of your sandals becomes heavier with each step. You pass a small roadside shrine, dedicated to the Lares, the household gods. A pang of sadness hits you. You used to make offerings there, asking for their protection and favor. Now, you wonder if they even recognize you, an exile. You remember hearing a rather strange story about exiles. Apparently, some Romans believed that if you sprinkled the dust from an exile's footprint onto your enemy's doorstep, it would bring them bad luck. Talk about a targeted marketing campaign for misfortune. It sounds like the kind of thing Pliny the Elder would have solemnly report with a straight face. Pliny the Elder, by the way, was obsessed with natural history. He even wrote a book about it, Natural History, in 37 volumes. He died doing what he loved, investigating an eruption of Mount Vesuvius a little too closely. As you continue your trek, you can't help but wonder about the practicalities of your situation. Where are you going to live? How are you going to earn a living? Your assets weren't entirely confiscated, so that's something, at least. You still have some funds, but you'll need to be careful. You hear about a town about 100 miles away where exiles sometimes congregate. It's not exactly glamorous, but it's a start. Suddenly, you remember a joke your uncle used to tell. Why did the Roman exile bring a ladder? Because he heard the food was good, but the standards were low. Alright, maybe you had to be there. You glance back towards the distant silhouette of Rome. It looks so beautiful, so powerful, so unattainable. A wave of bitterness washes over you. You try to push it down. Anger and resentment will only make this journey harder. The Roman Empire was remarkably adept at absorbing people. Conquered populations were often granted citizenship, and people from all corners of the empire flocked to Rome in search of opportunity. But for every success story, there were countless others who fell through the cracks, who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, or the wrong side of powerful people. It was a meritocracy, yes, but a meritocracy with a ruthless underbelly. You imagine the legions marching, their sandals echoing on the paved roads, enforcing Rome's will throughout the empire. They brought order, but also oppression. They built roads, but also walls. And sometimes, those walls were built around people, trapping them in a life of exile and isolation. Historians still argue whether the benefits of Roman rule outweighed the costs for those living under it. You pass a farmer tending his field. He glances at you with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. You can almost hear his thoughts, another one heading out of Rome. What did he do? You resist the urge to shout, I'm innocent. I was framed. No one would believe you anyway. You remember another quirky detail from your history lessons. Apparently, some Romans believed that being exiled actually lengthened your life. The theory was that removing someone from the stresses and dangers of Roman life actually preserved them. No chariot races, no political intrigues, no lead poisoning from the plumbing. Just simple living in fresh air. You can see the logic, but it doesn't exactly make you feel better about the whole situation. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. You find a small olive grove and decide to make camp for the night. You pull out some dried bread and cheese from your pack. It's not exactly a feast, but it's sustenance. As you eat, you think about your friends, your family, your life back in Rome. Will you ever see them again? Will you ever be able to return? The thought is both terrifying and strangely liberating. You are no longer bound by the rules and expectations of Roman society. You are free, in a way, to reinvent yourself. It's a daunting prospect, but also, a little exciting. You pull out a small piece of charcoal and a scrap of parchment. You start to sketch the landscape around you. The olive trees, the rolling hills, the fiery sunset. Maybe, just maybe, you can find some solace in art. Maybe you can even find a new purpose. You tell yourself another joke to raise your flagging spirits. What did the Roman exile say when he opened a new business? I'm starting fresh, but I'm still a little out of place. Okay, you'll admit, it needed work. The night deepens. The stars emerge, glittering in the dark expanse of the sky. You lie down on your cloak, using your pack as a pillow. The sounds of the countryside surround you, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of an owl. It's a world away from the hustle and bustle of Rome. You close your eyes and try to find some peace. You are in exile, yes. But you are also alive. And you have a long journey ahead of you. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk Roman execution. Find a comfy spot, maybe light a candle, preferably not the kind they'd use to set you aflame in the Colosseum, ironically, and let your mind drift back a couple millennia. You trudge through the bustling streets of Rome. The air is thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, roasting meat, and, well, sometimes a faint metallic tang that hints at the day's activities. You hear the rumble of carts, the shouts of vendors hawking their wares, and the ever-present murmur of Latin. You're trying to blend in, but your slightly too clean toga and nervous sweat betray you as a tourist. Welcome to the main event, folks, Roman justice, and its decidedly unjust moments. You round a corner and find yourself in a large, open space. The Forum. Today, it's not just a marketplace or a place for political debate. Today, it's theater. A rather morbid theater, granted. You see a small crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and, dare you say it, a little bit of entertainment. They're waiting for the spectacle to begin. And what a spectacle it promises to be. The Romans, you see, were nothing if not thorough in their punishments. They had a whole range of delightful options available, depending on your crime, your social status, and the emperor's general mood that day. Crucifixion was a popular choice, especially for slaves and rebels. Throwing people to the beasts was another crowd pleaser. And then, of course, there was good old-fashioned decapitation. Which, let's be honest, is pretty straightforward. No fuss, no muss, just a quick chop and snip. Head meets basket. End of story. Now, you might be thinking, well, that sounds barbaric. And you wouldn't be wrong. But it's important to remember that the Romans believed in the power of public executions. They weren't just about punishing the guilty, they were about deterring others from following in their footsteps. Think of it as ancient Roman reality TV, with slightly higher stakes and a lot less manufactured drama. One thing you notice is the practicality of it all. These weren't delicate, sanitized affairs. They were raw, visceral, and designed to be seen and remembered. The executioner, a burly fellow with a surprisingly sharp axe, isn't some shadowy figure hidden behind a mask. He's just a guy doing his job. A guy with really big biceps. You squint and see a condemned man being led forward. He's not putting up much of a fight. Maybe he's resigned to his fate, or maybe he's just too terrified to move. Either way, he's placed on a low block, his neck exposed. The executioner raises his axe. The crowd holds its breath. And then, thwack. It's actually quite swift. You almost feel bad for the poor bloke, almost. Decapitation, you see, wasn't just about killing someone. It was about making a statement. It was about asserting power and control. It was about sending a message loud and clear, don't mess with Rome. And, hey, sometimes it was about settling personal scores. You know, just a little extra incentive to keep your toga clean and your opinions to yourself. The condemned sometimes hoped for a coup de grace from a skilled executioner, but sometimes, especially in provincial executions, the unlucky recipient received a rather botched affair. Historians still argue whether the skill of executioners was due to experience or the quality of their axes. After the show, you wander away from the forum, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling in your stomach. You pass a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread is almost enough to distract you from the memory of that freshly separated head. Almost. You grab a loaf, hoping the simple act of eating something will ground you back in reality. But the image lingers. You start to wonder about the other methods of execution the Romans employed. Crucifixion, for example. A particularly nasty way to go, reserved for the worst of the worst. You imagine the slow, agonizing death, the hours spent hanging on the cross, exposed to the elements, the pain slowly driving you mad. Not exactly a picnic. In fact, Roman citizens were typically exempt from crucifixion. So, if you had to be a criminal in the Roman Empire, it was advantageous to be a citizen. And then there was Damnatio ad Bestias, being thrown to the beasts. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Actually, mostly lions, but you get the idea. Another crowd pleaser, especially when the beasts were feeling particularly hungry. You imagine the roar of the crowd, the smell of blood, and the sheer terror of facing a hungry predator. You'd almost prefer the swiftness of the axe. Almost. You think about it and wonder if you were a gladiator, if you'd prefer facing another trained gladiator or one of the trained lions. It's a tough decision either way. Speaking of gladiators, you recall stories of criminals being trained as gladiators, forced to fight for their lives in the arena. A slim chance of survival, sure, but still better than certain death. You imagine the grueling training, the constant fear, and the desperate hope that you might just live to see another day. At least you're getting some exercise, right? The Romans, as you're starting to realize, had a real knack for turning death into entertainment. They were masters of spectacle, and they weren't afraid to use violence to keep the masses entertained and in line. But it wasn't all blood and gore, though. Sometimes, they got creative. Like the time they executed a guy by tying him to a wild horse and dragging him through the streets until he was dead. Or the time they sewed someone into a sack filled with snakes and threw them into the river. You've got to admire the sheer inventiveness of it all. You also recall the story of Emperor Caligula, who supposedly enjoyed watching executions so much that he would often order them on a whim, just for his own amusement. He apparently found the whole thing terribly amusing. He was, to put it mildly, a bit of a nutcase. But let's not forget the Lex Talionis or eye for an eye concept that also factored into Roman justice. In some cases, the punishment mirrored the crime. So, if you stole someone's hand, you might lose your own. If you committed arson, you might be burned alive. A rather literal interpretation of justice, but hey, at least it was consistent. It really makes you wonder if the phrase, "let the punishment fit the crime," originated during the Roman era. Historians still argue whether the consistency of Roman justice applied equally across all social classes. As the sun begins to set, you find yourself back in your rented villa, exhausted and slightly traumatized. You pour yourself a glass of wine, hopefully a good vintage, something to take the edge off. You sit on the patio, listening to the chirping of the crickets and trying to forget the images of the day. It's hard, though. The Romans, for all their accomplishments, their engineering, their law, their literature, were also a brutal people. They built an empire on conquest and maintained it through fear and violence. Their executions were a stark reminder of the price of disobedience. The price of being on the wrong side of Rome. And as you sip your wine, you can't help but wonder what it must have been like to live in that world. A world where death was a public spectacle, where justice was often arbitrary, and where the line between right and wrong was often blurred. You realize, maybe, modern reality TV is actually a little better. Maybe you should stick to watching gladiators on screen. Maybe. Now, put your feet up, and let those worries drift off to sleep, friend. We can explore more of the darker corners of history later. Alright, settle in, buttercups. Let's talk about shame. Not the fleeting kind you get after accidentally liking your ex's mom's Instagram post from 2012. No, we're diving deep into the public humiliation of ancient Rome. Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride. You trudge along the Via Sacra, your sandals slapping against the worn cobblestones. The sun beats down mercilessly. You didn't drink enough water this morning, did you? Classic you. The air is thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, roasting meat from a nearby thermopolium, basically, a Roman fast food joint, and something vaguely floral. Probably someone trying to mask the first two smells. Spoiler alert, it's not working. You're on your way to the Forum. Normally, the Forum is the bustling heart of Roman life, a place for political debates, business deals, and gossiping with your mates. Today, however, the pit of your stomach is doing the cha-cha. Because today, you are the main attraction. And not in a good way. You see, you've been found guilty of, well, let's just say you borrowed a little too much grain from the communal stores. Grain hoarding, they're calling it. You thought nobody would notice. You thought wrong. That's what she said. Okay, I'm sorry, force of habit. The punishment? Public shaming. A staple of Roman justice, designed to deter others from following in your, grainy footsteps. You're led towards a raised platform, the rostra, usually reserved for orators and politicians. Today, it's your stage. A stage for your humiliation. As you're led up, you can feel hundreds of eyes on you. Some are curious, some are judgmental, some are downright gleeful. You catch snippets of conversation, look at him, the greedy swine, and serves him right, thinking he could cheat the system. You try to shrink into yourself, but it's no use. You're stuck here. They've even put you in a special tunic, a bright, garish yellow that screams, "Look at me. I'm a moron." It's the Roman equivalent of a scarlet letter, only less fashionable. A herald steps forward, his voice booming across the Forum. He reads out your crime, embellishing it with details that make you sound like a cross between Nero and a squirrel on a meth binge. The crowd roars with disapproval. Someone throws a rotten tomato. It misses you, thankfully, landing with a splat on the toga of a nearby senator who looks absolutely thrilled. Now comes the real fun. You're placed in the stocks. These aren't the fancy, picturesque stocks you see in Renaissance fairs. These are rough, splintery wooden contraptions designed for maximum discomfort. Your wrists and ankles are locked in place, leaving you exposed and vulnerable. You can't move. You can't hide. All you can do is stand there and endure. And endure you do. 4 hours. The sun continues to beat down. People jeer, laugh, and throw things. Mostly rotten fruit and vegetables, but also the occasional rock. You try to focus on something, anything, to distract yourself. The intricate carvings on a nearby temple. The clouds drifting across the sky. The fact that you should have invested in a better grain hoarding strategy. Historically, the Romans believed in public shaming as a way to maintain social order and deter crime. Shame, they figured, was a powerful motivator. And let's be honest, it probably worked, to some extent. Public disgrace was a big deal in a society so focused on honor and reputation. Losing face in front of your peers could have serious repercussions, not just for you, but for your entire family. One quirky historical tidbit, some Romans even hired professional claqueurs, people paid to applaud or boo at public events, including trials and executions. Talk about manufactured outrage. It's like the ancient Roman version of Twitter bots. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of public shaming was primarily due to its deterrent effect on potential criminals or its function as a way to reinforce social norms and maintain the power of the ruling elite. It was probably a little bit of both, honestly. Let's face it, most forms of punishment are about both discouraging bad behavior and reminding everyone who's in charge. The day wears on. The crowd starts to thin out. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forum. You're exhausted, parched, and covered in a delightful medley of decaying produce. Your skin is itching. You feel utterly humiliated. But as the last of the onlookers trickle away, a flicker of defiance sparks within you. You may be down, but you're not out. You'll rebuild. You'll find a way to restore your reputation. You'll probably still hoard grain, because, let's be real, old habits die hard, but you'll be much more careful next time. Finally, the guards return to release you from the stocks. Your limbs are stiff and aching. You stumble as you walk, but you manage to keep your head held high. You've survived. Barely. The shaming ceremony you endured today was a fairly common occurrence in Roman life. Public punishments were used for a wide range of offenses, from petty theft to treason. The severity of the punishment varied depending on the crime and the social status of the offender. For example, a slave might be flogged or branded, while a free citizen might face fines, exile, or even death. One fringe theory suggests that the Romans used public shaming as a way to control the population and suppress dissent. By making an example of those who challenged the status quo, they could discourage others from doing the same. Makes sense, right? Keep the masses in line by showing them what happens when they step out of it. Historians still debate whether the Roman justice system was truly fair and equitable, or whether it was biased against the poor and marginalized. Given the vast disparities in wealth and power within Roman society, it's likely that the system favored the elite. But hey, who am I to say? I'm just a disembodied voice narrating your public humiliation. You make your way back home, avoiding eye contact with anyone you pass. Your neighbors probably know what happened. They're probably gossiping about you right now. But you don't care. You just want to get inside, wash the rotten tomato off your tunic, and maybe have a nice, stiff drink of water, of course. Because hydration is important, even after a day of public shame. As you collapse onto your bed, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will you ever be able to regain the respect of your community? Will you ever be able to look people in the eye without feeling a pang of embarrassment? Maybe. Maybe not. But one thing is for sure, you've learned a valuable lesson. Don't get caught hoarding grain. Seriously. And that, my sleepy little Romans, is your public humiliation for the day. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this little foray into the darker side of ancient justice. Now go forth, be good citizens, and for goodness sake, don't steal the grain. Alright, settle in, let your shoulders drop. We're about to take a little field trip. A slightly less than relaxing field trip. Think of it as industrial tourism. But with significantly fewer gift shops and a whole lot more, well, rock. You trudge down the worn path, the sun already a distant memory. The air grows heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic. Iron, maybe? Or something far less pleasant clinging to your lungs. You're headed for the Metalla. The mines. And trust me, friend, this isn't exactly a day spa. The Romans, masters of engineering and conquest, needed resources. Mountains of them. For their legions, their buildings, their, frankly, rather excessive plumbing. And where do resources come from? That's right, grumpy ol' Mother Earth. They dug deep. I mean, seriously, deep. Some mines went down hundreds of feet, a veritable labyrinth of tunnels. Can you imagine trying to navigate that after a long day of, mining? You reach the entrance, a gaping maw in the hillside. A rough-hewn sign, if you can call a scratched piece of slate a sign, warns in faded Latin, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Okay, maybe not. But I'm sure some enterprising mine supervisor had that embroidered on a particularly scratchy tunic. The air gets noticeably colder as you step inside. It's the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there, like a permanent tenant who never pays rent. Torches flicker, casting dancing shadows that play tricks on your eyes. Is that a rat scurrying in the corner? Probably. Maybe it's just one of your fellow workers, also considering their life choices. The light catches the pickaxe in your hand, a heavy, unforgiving tool that will be your companion for the next. Well, let's not dwell on that. Just focus on breathing. In, out, good. The Romans were, surprisingly, quite organized about this whole mining thing. They had different types of mines, depending on what they were after. Gold mines, silver mines, copper, iron, even salt mines. You name it, they probably dug for it. They even had a system of water management, using aqueducts and pumps to keep the tunnels from flooding. Genius. It's almost enough to make you forget the whole, being buried alive in a dark hole, aspect. Almost. The noise is intense. The constant clang of metal on rock, the echoing drips of water, the shouted orders of the overseers. It's a cacophony that grinds against your sanity. And the dust. Oh, the dust. It's everywhere. Coating your skin, clinging to your throat, filling your lungs. You can practically taste it, a gritty, metallic tang. Wonderful. Historians still argue whether the Roman mining system was truly efficient or just brutally exploitative. I mean, let's be honest, it was probably a bit of both. Resourceful Romans. Speaking of brutal, your fellow miners are a mixed bunch, to say the least. Mostly slaves, of course. War captives, criminals, people who had the distinct misfortune of owing someone very important a lot of money. But there are also some free men, desperate enough to take on this kind of work. Maybe they had families to feed, debts to pay, or perhaps they just really, really loved rocks. Who knows? The Romans even used a primitive form of hydraulic mining, called hushing. They'd build up a reservoir of water and then release it in a massive flood to wash away the overburden and expose the ore. Effective? Absolutely. Environmentally friendly? Let's just say Greta Thunberg wouldn't have been a fan. Fringe fact, some scholars believe that the Romans also used trained dormice to detect poisonous gases in the mines. If the dormouse keeled over, you knew it was time to evacuate. Clever, if slightly cruel. I guess you could say the dormice were the canaries in the coal mine, only they weren't canaries, and this isn't a coal mine. But you get the idea. Your shift begins. You swing your pickaxe, the force jarring your arms and shoulders. The rock is stubborn, resisting your efforts. Each swing sends a shower of dust and splinters into the air. You cough, trying to clear your throat. This is going to be a long day. And tomorrow will probably be even longer. One of the overseers, a burly man with a whip coiled around his waist, barks an order at you. He wants you to fill a basket with ore. Now. You grit your teeth and swing again. There's a rumor among the workers that the overseer keeps a pet badger down here, for motivational purposes. I'm not sure how much I believe it, but I'm also not keen to test the rumor. Lunch is a meager ration of bread and watery gruel. You eat it quickly, trying to ignore the dust and the flies. There's little conversation. Most of the miners are too exhausted to talk. They just stare blankly ahead, lost in their own grim thoughts. The bread tastes oddly of mildew and desperation. Don't worry, it builds character. Or, possibly a mild case of dysentery. The workday stretches on, an endless cycle of swinging, hauling, and sweating. Your muscles ache, your hands are blistered, and your lungs burn. The darkness presses in on you, suffocating and claustrophobic. You start to lose track of time. Is it morning? Afternoon? Does it even matter? The only constant is the relentless work. You hear stories, whispered in hushed tones during the brief rest periods. Stories of cave-ins, of poisonous gases, of miners who went mad in the darkness and never came back. You try not to think about them. Superstition runs rife. Apparently, whistling in the mines is a huge no-no. Some say it angers the genius loci, the spirit of the place. Others say it just attracts cave-ins. Either way, best to keep your lips sealed, right? Fun fact, the Romans sometimes used water-powered mills to crush and separate the valuable metals. These mills were incredibly efficient for their time, and some of them were quite elaborate. Imagine, back-breaking labor and industrial technology. As the hours crawl by, you begin to feel strange. Disoriented. The flickering torchlight plays tricks on your eyes. You see shadows moving in the periphery. Are they just shadows? Or is something else down here with you? You remember a story you heard about a particularly unlucky miner who accidentally unearthed a perfectly preserved Roman bathhouse while digging a new tunnel. Talk about mixed blessings, he probably got a promotion and a free massage before being sent back to the worst section of the mine. Finally, the shift ends. You trudge back towards the entrance, your body screaming in protest. The climb back to the surface feels like the hardest part of the day. Your limbs are leaden, your head pounds, and every breath is a struggle. As you emerge from the mine, the sunlight hits you like a physical blow. You blink, trying to adjust your eyes. The world is suddenly awash in color. Green trees, blue sky, puffy white clouds. It's almost overwhelming. You can't help but feel a brief surge of joy. But the joy is fleeting. You know you'll be back tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until. This is your life now. A living death underground. You trudge towards the barracks, already dreading the next dawn. Better get some rest. You'll need it. Sleep well, if you can. Okay, settle in. Let's get comfy. Dim the lights if you need to. We're about to dive into a truly delicious bit of Roman weirdness. I mean, sure, gladiatorial combat gets all the press, and yeah, their plumbing was surprisingly advanced, but trust me, nothing says ancient Rome quite like a burlap sack full of angry animals and a really bad swimmer. You trudge through the bustling forum, the smell of roasting chestnuts and unwashed plebeians assaulting your nostrils in equal measure. The sun beats down on your toga-clad shoulders. You're on your way to the Basilica Julia, not for legal advice, thankfully, but because a rather unique spectacle is about to unfold. News travels fast in Rome, even without Twitter. And the buzz today? It's all about someone who really messed up. Specifically, someone who offed a parent. Parricide, as they delicately called it. Now, in modern times, matricide and patricide are, let's face it, pretty frowned upon. Jail time, maybe even a lifetime of therapy. But the Romans? They had a certain flair for punishment. It's a fact. The scale of punishment must match the crime. You'll never catch them making it seem like it was a light, easy thing to do to kill someone. So, buckle up, because you're about to witness the Pena Culiae. And trust me, it's memorable. You push your way through the throng, the cries of vendors hawking their wares a dull drone in your ears. Someone tries to sell you a particularly mangy-looking parrot. You politely decline. Honestly, who buys a parrot in ancient Rome? Were they even native to Italy? Historians still argue whether exotic pets were widespread status symbols or just occasional eccentricities of the wealthy. But that's a story for another time. Right now, you need to get a good view. See, the Romans weren't ones for half measures. If you murdered your mom or dad, or, technically, any direct descendant, grandparents, great-grandparents, you get the idea, you weren't just getting a slap on the wrist. Oh no. You were getting the full Pena Culiae experience. First, you get whipped. Nice and good. Then they sew you into a leather sack. Not a cozy, sleeping bag type of sack. More of a rough, scratchy, deeply unpleasant sack. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Into the sack with you go a delightful assortment of live animals. A dog, a snake, a monkey, and, most famously, a rooster. Yes, a rooster. Not a particularly intimidating animal, you might think. But trapped in a confined space with a panicked Roman, a yapping dog, a hissing snake, and a possibly rabid monkey? Suddenly, that rooster becomes a feathered fury of pecking and clawing. I feel bad for that rooster because, in essence, it's a crime that should never have happened that it is being made to pay for. Don't you think? But, hey, that's Roman justice for you. It's one thing to put a human in a bag, but another entirely to endanger 3 animals, too. You wince as you imagine the chaos unfolding inside that sack. The screaming, the biting, the scratching, it's not exactly a spa day. You wonder if anyone ever managed to survive the initial animal onslaught. Probably not. It sounds like hell. Though, at least the animals were guaranteed to die quickly. The crowd grows thicker, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the air. A hush falls as the condemned is led forward. You can't quite make out their face, but their shoulders are slumped in despair. Imagine being that person. The shame, the fear, the knowledge that your next swim is going to be a very long one. It's enough to make you swear off parental murder forever. Heck, even if the rooster did nothing, being in such close proximity with the other 3 animals would be enough to kill you on their own. They all are, in essence, deadly. But hold on a second, the person being led out, is that Gaius? But that's absurd. He seemed so nice. He even offered to pay for my parrot. Oh, wait, he seems to be walking the wrong way, never mind, it seems like my eyes were just playing tricks on me. Okay, so, once you're suitably animal-infused, the sack is then carted off to the nearest body of water. Usually, the Tiber River. And then, splash. You're tossed in. Weighted down by the animals, and, let's be honest, the abject horror of your situation, you sink like a stone. End of story. Simple, right? Effective? Absolutely. Over the top. Maybe just a little. But hey, that was the Roman way. They weren't afraid to make a statement. And the statement here was crystal clear: don't kill your parents. Seriously. Not even if they're constantly nagging you about your career choices. It always strikes me as odd that they used a monkey. You would think that they could think of a worse animal. Maybe a particularly venomous snake or scorpion. A rabid dog, perhaps. Even a bear. A bear would be much, much worse. You watch as the executioners prepare the sack, the mood somber and tense. You can't help but feel a little morbidly curious. After all, you probably won't see something like this every day. I mean, hopefully not. But, as you stand there, contemplating the fate of the parricide, you can't help but wonder, why those animals? Why a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster? It's such a bizarre menagerie. Historians still argue whether the animals were chosen for symbolic reasons or if it was simply a matter of availability. Some say the dog represents disloyalty, the snake treachery, the monkey a mockery of humanity, and the rooster the disruption of the natural order. Others suggest it was just whatever the local pet shop had on sale that day. Hey, we got a clearance on monkeys. Perfect for parricides. One fringe theory suggests the animals were chosen based on their association with specific gods or goddesses, and their inclusion was meant to invoke divine wrath upon the condemned. The snake, for example, could be connected to underworld deities. It could also be based on what would be the worst experience for the person. Were they especially scared of monkeys? Did they detest roosters? Were they allergic to dogs? Regardless, the symbolism is pretty on the nose. You've betrayed your family, dog, you've struck from the shadows, snake, you've descended to a bestial state, monkey, and you've shattered the family harmony, rooster crowing at all hours, presumably. As the execution draws near, you notice a rather plump senator nearby, nervously dabbing his brow with a silk handkerchief. He seems oddly invested in the proceedings. You wonder if he has a particularly strained relationship with his own offspring. Maybe he's just here for the spectacle. You know what they say, politics is show business for ugly people. The ritual begins. The condemned is dragged forward, kicking and screaming. The sack is opened. The animals are deposited. You can hear the muffled sounds of panic and squawking from within. It's not a pleasant sound. But it's certainly effective at deterring future parricides. Though, maybe the threat of eternal damnation would be better. That, or more public funding for family therapy. Just a thought. The sack is sealed, and the procession to the Tiber begins. You follow along with the crowd, the energy shifting from morbid curiosity to something akin to satisfaction. It's a strange thing to witness such a brutal punishment, but you can't deny that it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of family. As you watch the sack disappear beneath the murky waters of the Tiber, you can't help but feel a slight sense of unease. It's a grim reminder of the darker side of Roman society. And it makes you appreciate your own, slightly dysfunctional, but ultimately loving family a little bit more. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? A bit damp, perhaps. But certainly unforgettable. Let's hope you never find yourself on the receiving end of the Pina Culiae. Unless, of course, you're into that sort of thing. No judgment here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I need a bath. And maybe a nice, long nap. And possibly a very strong drink. Until next time, stay out of trouble, and try not to kill your parents. Seriously. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about Roman punishments. Not exactly soothing bedtime material, I know, but think of it as a history lullaby with a slightly sharper edge. So, you trudge through the Forum, the heart of Rome. The sun beats down, the air hums with the shouts of vendors and the murmur of 1,000 conversations. But amidst the everyday hustle, a darker side exists, a system of laws and punishments designed to keep things, well, relatively in order. And, spoiler alert, some of them were dramatic. Let's start with adultery. Now, Roman views on marriage were complex. Officially, it was a sacred institution, the bedrock of society. Unofficially, well, let's just say the emperors didn't always set the best example. Mainstream historical fact, under Augustus, adultery became a public crime, punishable by exile. Yeah, banished. Can you imagine telling your boss you're moving to a remote island because of marital indiscretions? Sorry, gotta go. Turns out, messing around with the senator's wife has geographical consequences. But the punishment wasn't always exile. It depended on your social standing, and more importantly, the standing of the person you were messing with. If a woman committed adultery with a slave, it was a very different story than if she dallied with a senator. And, surprise, surprise, the men usually got off easier. Fringe tidbit time, a husband had the right to kill his wife if he caught her in the act of adultery, but only under very specific circumstances, like catching her in his house or his father-in-law's house. Location, 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 even when you're murdering your adulterous spouse. Historians still argue whether this right was widely exercised or more of a theoretical power play, but either way, it's not exactly a recipe for marital bliss, is it? And it wasn't just the husband who could mete out justice. The paterfamilias, the head of the household, wielded considerable power. He could, in theory, decide the fate of his children and even his wife, within certain legal limits. Think of him as the original Roman HOA, but with significantly more power to fine you for overgrown ivy, or, other things. Moving on to theft. Now, stealing in ancient Rome wasn't quite the free-for-all you might imagine. They had laws, and they weren't shy about enforcing them. Roman law, you see, was obsessed with ownership. Everything had an owner, even if that owner was the state. Mess with someone's stuff, and you were messing with the established order, and the Romans did not like that. Mainstream historical fact, Roman law distinguished between various types of theft, with different penalties for each. Simple theft might result in fines or restitution, meaning you had to pay back what you stole, plus a little extra for the trouble. Aggravated theft, like stealing from a temple or robbing someone at night, carried much harsher penalties. Quirky tidbit: one specific law addressed the theft of grapes. Seriously. It was illegal to steal grapes from someone else's vineyard, and the punishment was, well, it varied. Fines were common, but depending on the scale of the theft, you could face physical punishment. Imagine getting flogged for a handful of grapes. Ouch. I bet they made sure to pick the sweetest ones, at least. Historians still argue whether this grape theft law was a serious attempt to protect agricultural property or a way to keep the lower classes from getting too uppity with their neighbors' produce. Either way, it paints a vivid picture of Roman priorities, doesn't it? And speaking of priorities, let's talk about parricide. Now, that's a fancy word for killing your parents. Yeah, not a great look, even back then. Mainstream historical fact: parricide was considered one of the most heinous crimes in Roman society. The punishment? Well, it wasn't pretty. The convicted parricide was sewn into a leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape, and then thrown into the nearest body of water. The dog, the rooster, the viper, and the ape are already having a bad day, but the sack? A truly terrible idea. Talk about a bad way to spend an afternoon. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe that the inclusion of specific animals in the sack was symbolic, representing the different aspects of the parricide's transgression. The dog symbolized loyalty betrayed, the rooster cowardice, the viper malice, and the ape, well, historians still argue about the ape. Some say it represented the parricide's degraded humanity, others suggest it was simply chosen for its perceived ugliness and general unpleasantness. Maybe they just happened to have an extra ape lying around. Hey, we need an animal for the parricide sack. Anyone seen Bobo lately? Regardless, the image of that sack, filled with struggling animals and a desperate murderer, is a powerful reminder of the Roman disgust for this particular crime. Of course, not all punishments were quite so dramatic. Fines were common for a variety of offenses, from petty theft to public drunkenness. Exile, as we mentioned earlier, was another popular option, particularly for political crimes. And then there was Damnatio ad Bestias, which you might recognize if you've ever watched gladiator movies. It translates to condemnation to beasts, and it meant being thrown into the arena to face wild animals. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Mainstream historical fact: Damnatio ad Bestias was primarily used for slaves, foreigners, and those considered enemies of the state. It was a public spectacle designed to deter others from committing similar crimes. Fringe tidbit: while lions and tigers were the most common beasts used, there are accounts of Romans using other, more exotic animals, including crocodiles, elephants, and even trained seals. Imagine being sentenced to death by seal. You are hereby condemned to be tickled to death. Release the flippered assassin. Alright, I'm kidding, probably. Historians still argue whether these accounts are accurate or simply embellished for dramatic effect. But the fact that such stories existed at all speaks to the Roman appetite for spectacle and their willingness to use animals as instruments of punishment. And then, there's crucifixion. Probably the most infamous Roman punishment, thanks to its association with, well, you know. Mainstream historical fact: crucifixion was a particularly brutal and degrading form of execution, reserved primarily for slaves, rebels, and those considered the lowest of the low. It was designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering, both physically and psychologically. Quirky tidbit: there were variations in how crucifixion was carried out. Sometimes the condemned were nailed to the cross, sometimes they were tied. Sometimes they were left to die slowly over several days, sometimes their suffering was prolonged with acts of cruelty. It's all pretty awful, really. Historians still argue about the exact mechanics of crucifixion and the causes of death, but there's no debate about its effectiveness as a tool of terror and control. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the darker side of Roman justice. From grape theft to parricide, the Romans had a punishment for just about every conceivable crime. And while some of their methods might seem barbaric to us today, they were undoubtedly effective in maintaining order, or at least, the appearance of order. Now, try and sleep soundly knowing that you're unlikely to be sewn into a sack with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape anytime soon. Sweet dreams, or at least, dreams that don't involve Roman justice. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's dim the lights a little, maybe fluff that pillow. We're going to drift away, mentally of course, to ancient Rome. We're talking about punishment, but not just any punishment, punishment with a hefty side of social stratification. Think of it like a legal system designed by a tiered wedding cake, with the best flavor reserved for the top layer. You're walking down a dusty Roman street. The midday sun beats down, making the air shimmer above the paving stones. You hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the hawker's cries competing for your attention, the rumble of carts loaded with amphorae filled with, probably questionable wine. It's a vibrant, chaotic scene, but a scene very much shaped by invisible lines. These lines dictated everything, from what you ate to where you lived, and most definitely, to how the Roman legal system saw you. Now, imagine someone bumps into you. Just a little jostle, maybe spills a bit of their olive oil. Annoying, right? But what happens next depends entirely on who you are and who bumped into you. If you're a wealthy patrician, a member of the Roman elite, and you were bumped by a plebeian, a commoner, well, that plebeian might be facing a rather unpleasant day. A fine, public humiliation, maybe even a flogging, depending on the severity of the spill. The laws, you see, were flexible. Like a yoga instructor attempting a pretzel pose. But flip the script. You, a lowly plebeian, accidentally bump into a senator overflowing with arrogance and toga. Suddenly, the scenario takes on a darker hue. You might be looking at imprisonment, forced labor, or even, well, let's just say the consequences could be dire. The ancient Roman legal system wasn't blind, it just had a very selective prescription for which eyes it wanted to see through. Historians still argue whether this blatant social bias was a deliberate feature of the system, designed to maintain the power of the elite, or simply an unfortunate side effect of a hierarchical society. I mean, think about it. Were they actively trying to squash the little guy, or were they just really, really bad at writing impartial laws? It's a chicken or the egg situation, isn't it? And it wasn't just petty offenses, either. The disparities were even more pronounced when it came to serious crimes. A patrician accused of murder, for example, could often rely on his connections, his wealth, and his ability to hire skilled advocates to argue his case. Exile, perhaps, was the worst he could expect, a life of relative comfort in some far-flung corner of the Roman Empire. Maybe he'd get to open a little vineyard in Gaul. Picture him, sipping wine, complaining about the barbarians while the person he murdered rots in the ground. Life's unfair, isn't it? A plebeian accused of the same crime, however. His options were considerably less appealing. Crucifixion, being thrown to the beasts in the arena, or forced into gladiatorial combat were all very real possibilities. The arena. Oh, the theatrics. Imagine being sentenced to die in front of a cheering crowd because you had the audacity to be poor and accused of something. I'm not saying it's a great system, I'm just painting a picture. Now, speaking of the arena, did you know that some gladiators were actually celebrities? Like ancient Roman rock stars, complete with adoring fans and lucrative endorsement deals, for things like gladiator-branded swords. Okay, I made that last one up, but the fame part is true. It's a bit of a bizarre juxtaposition, isn't it? Brutal death as entertainment, with the participants occasionally becoming national heroes. Beyond the arena, slavery was a massive factor in the legal system. Slaves, of course, had virtually no rights. They were considered property, not people. And punishments for slaves were often incredibly brutal. Flogging, branding, and even mutilation were common practices. If a slave dared to strike his master, the consequences could be unimaginable. If a slave did something terrible, like, say, murder his master, the entire household of slaves was often put to death. It was considered collective punishment, a way to deter other slaves from even thinking about rebellion. Can you imagine that level of fear and paranoia hanging in the air? Talk about a hostile work environment. And don't even get me started on the laws surrounding debt. In the early Roman Republic, if you couldn't pay your debts, you could literally become a slave to your creditor. Talk about a stressful financial situation. It wasn't until later that these laws were reformed, but the threat of debt bondage loomed large over the lives of many plebeians. One quirky tidbit: there were actually laws against excessive mourning. The Romans were big on order and decorum, even when it came to grief. Loud wailing and overly dramatic displays of sorrow were frowned upon, and could even result in fines. I guess they thought it was bad for morale or something. Buck up, citizen. Your loved one is dead, but the Republic must go on. Historians still argue about the motivations behind these sumptuary laws. Were they genuinely concerned about the emotional well-being of the population, or were they simply trying to control public displays of emotion that might threaten the social order? Probably a bit of both, if we're being honest. The punishments themselves were often designed to be public and humiliating. Stocks, pillories, and public floggings were common sights in Roman cities. The goal wasn't just to punish the offender, but to deter others from committing similar crimes. It was a form of social control, a way of reminding everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. Now, the idea of public shaming as a form of punishment is kind of fascinating, isn't it? We still see echoes of it today, in things like online doxing and cancel culture. Okay, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but the underlying principle, using public humiliation to enforce social norms, is still very much alive and well. But there were some exceptions, some cracks in the system. Sometimes, a particularly charismatic orator or a particularly sympathetic magistrate might be able to sway public opinion and secure a more lenient sentence for someone, even someone from a lower social class. But these were rare occurrences, more like lucky breaks than systematic reforms. And there were times when the plebeians themselves would rise up in protest, demanding greater rights and fairer treatment under the law. These secessions of the plebs, where the commoners would literally withdraw from the city and refuse to participate in public life, were often successful in forcing the patricians to make concessions. It was a reminder that even in a highly stratified society, the power of the people could not be ignored forever. One mainstream historical fact, the 12 Tables, a set of laws codified in the mid-5th century BCE, were a significant step towards legal reform in Rome. They were publicly displayed, so everyone could theoretically know the laws. Emphasis on theoretically, illiteracy was still rampant, and knowing the law didn't mean it would be applied fairly. And now, you're starting to feel the weight of all this, aren't you? The injustice, the inequality, the sheer brutality of it all. It's a heavy thing to carry. But it's also important to remember that the Roman legal system, for all its flaws, was a product of its time. It reflected the values and prejudices of a society deeply divided along social lines. Sleep well, friend. Try not to dream of Roman justice. It's a recipe for a restless night. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's delve into something truly ancient, something that echoes even now in the sterile halls of law schools and the pronouncements of judges, Roman law. You trudge, perhaps reluctantly, alongside me through the dusty annals of history. Picture it, sun-baked forums, orators gesturing wildly, and the scribes frantically trying to keep up with the pronouncements that would shape civilization, or at least, a significant chunk of it. It all starts, as so many things do in Rome, with tradition and a healthy dose of patrician self-interest. The earliest Roman law, often referred to as the Law of the 12 Tables, was, well, tablets. 12 of them, to be precise, hammered onto bronze and displayed prominently in the Roman Forum around 450 BC. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of posting your terms and conditions, though slightly more permanent. It's a foundational moment, this codification. Prior to this, legal interpretation largely rested with the priestly class, which, as you might imagine, wasn't exactly democratically inclined. Imagine trying to argue a speeding ticket based on a dream you had that a god told you to go faster. Good luck with that. Mainstream historical fact number 1, the 12 tables represented a significant victory for the plebeians, the common folk, who agitated for a written code to protect them from arbitrary interpretations of customary law. Before this, justice felt a bit like a rigged game, and the 12 tables were an attempt to level the playing field, though let's be honest, the field was still pretty uneven. Here's a quirky tidbit for you: the penalty for publishing defamatory songs was beating with a club. So, Roman diss tracks weren't just bad for your ego, they were bad for your physical well-being. Think twice before roasting your enemies, kids. It might land you in hot water, or rather, in front of someone wielding a large stick. Historians still argue whether the 12 tables were a truly revolutionary document or a clever way for the patricians to maintain control while appearing to concede to popular demand. Was it progress, or just progress light? The debate rages on, fueled by the unending supply of caffeine and academic angst. As Rome grew, so too did its legal system. The praetor, a magistrate with judicial responsibilities, became increasingly important. He, and it was almost always a he, let's be real, would issue edicts at the beginning of his term, outlining the legal principles he intended to apply. This is where things get interesting because these edicts, over time, became a source of law themselves. It's like the judge setting the rules of the game before it even starts. Bit of an advantage there, wouldn't you say? You saunter onward, picturing these praetors, probably a bit portly, sweating in their togas, trying to navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape. They were, in essence, building a common law system, adapting and refining legal principles to address new situations. It's a messy, organic process, far removed from the rigid codification of the 12 tables. Mainstream historical fact, ius gentium, or the law of nations, developed to deal with legal issues involving foreigners. As Rome expanded its empire, it needed a legal framework that could apply to people who weren't Roman citizens. This was a major step towards the development of international law. Basically, a Roman realized that if you're conquering everyone, you should probably have rules for them. A quirky tidbit: Roman law recognized the legal existence of corporations, including municipalities and religious associations. They could own property, enter into contracts, and even sue and be sued. So, even back then, you could sue a church. Who knew? Historians still argue whether ius gentium was truly based on universal principles of justice or simply a pragmatic tool for Roman imperial administration. Was it a genuine attempt to create a fair and equitable legal system for all, or just a way to keep the conquered territories in line? The answer, as it often is, probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. Then comes Justinian, the Byzantine emperor who decided to take on the Herculean task of codifying all of Roman law. You can almost hear the collective groan of the legal scholars who were tasked with sifting through centuries of legal pronouncements, edicts, and commentaries. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, a comprehensive compilation of Roman law that would become the foundation of legal systems throughout Europe for centuries to come. It's like the ultimate legal textbook, the Encyclopedia of Roman Jurisprudence. Mainstream historical fact, the Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled in the 6th century AD, consisted of 4 parts: the Codex Justinianus, a collection of imperial constitutions; the Digest, a compilation of legal opinions; the Institutes, a textbook for law students; and the Novelli, new constitutions issued by Justinian himself. Try memorizing that. I dare you. A quirky tidbit, the Digest included excerpts from the writings of over 39 different Roman jurists. It's like a legal mixtape, featuring all the greatest hits of Roman legal thought. Here's your light joke for this section: why did the Roman lawyer bring a ladder to court? He wanted to reach a higher court. Historians still argue whether Justinian's codification was a brilliant act of legal preservation or a stifling attempt to impose a static legal system on a dynamic society. Did he save Roman law from oblivion, or did he freeze it in time, preventing it from evolving and adapting to new circumstances? Either way, you can't deny the guy had ambition. The legacy of Roman law is undeniable. You stroll, now with a newfound sense of purpose, through the legal landscape of modern Europe. You can see its fingerprints all over the place, from the civil law systems of France and Germany to the influence on canon law and even elements of common law. The principles of natural law, the emphasis on reason and justice, the careful consideration of individual rights, all these owe a debt to the Roman legal tradition. Even the way laws are structured and interpreted reflects the influence of Roman legal thought. Mainstream historical fact, many modern legal concepts, such as the presumption of innocence, the right to due process, and the importance of evidence, can be traced back to Roman law. So, the next time you watch a legal drama, remember that you're seeing echoes of ancient Rome. Here's a light joke: what did the Roman lawyer say to his client? "I'll see you in the forum." A quirky tidbit: the concept of culpa, or fault, in modern tort law derives directly from Roman law. So, if you accidentally trip and spill coffee on someone, you can thank the Romans for providing the legal framework for them to sue you. Historians still argue whether the continued relevance of Roman law is a testament to its inherent wisdom or simply a result of historical accident and the power of tradition. Is it a timeless source of legal inspiration, or just a historical relic that we cling to out of habit? Here's a joke: a Roman walks into a bar and asks for a martinus. "You mean a martini?" the bartender asks. The Roman replies, "If I wanted a double, I would have asked for it." As you reach the end of your journey, contemplating the vastness of Roman legal history, you can't help but feel a sense of awe. From the humble beginnings of the 12 Tables to the monumental achievement of the Corpus Juris Civilis, Roman law has shaped the world we live in today. So, next time you hear someone talking about the law, remember the Romans. They might not have invented everything, but they certainly laid the groundwork for a great deal. Now, finally, sleep well. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's get cozy, maybe dim the lights a little. Today, we're diving deep, like Mariana Trench deep, into the murky waters of Roman justice and some, differing opinions about it. Think about that toga-clad dude judging you with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, that guy. You trudge along the Appian Way, sandals slapping against the ancient stones, the midday sun beating down with the force of 1,000 Roman emperors trying to get your attention. You're headed to the Forum, the heart of Roman life, and today, it's throbbing with more than just commerce and gossip. Today, there's a trial. A big one. Maybe someone dared to criticize Caesar's questionable fashion choices, purple. Really? Or maybe they poisoned their neighbor's prize-winning peacock. Whatever it is, the stakes are high, and the air crackles with anticipation. Roman justice, you see, wasn't exactly a gentle hug. It was more like a firm handshake, that gradually tightened into a bone-crushing grip. While the Roman legal system gave us concepts like due process and the presumption of innocence, notions that are, kind of important, its application was, shall we say, nuanced. Especially if you weren't a wealthy, male Roman citizen. Let's just say the scales of justice were heavily weighted in favor of those who already had a leg up, which makes you wonder, where is the equality in all of this? One of the biggest debates in Roman society, and one that echoes even now, was about the purpose of punishment itself. Was it about retribution, about evening the score, an eye for an eye, or more accurately, a gladiator for a stolen chariot? Or was it about deterrence, scaring everyone else into towing the line? Or perhaps rehabilitation, trying to nudge wrongdoers back onto the straight and narrow? It's a question that philosophers and lawmakers have been wrestling with for millennia. Maybe the Romans didn't realize that the question would still be brought up even after their time. Enter Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, playwright, and all-around fascinating character. Seneca was a man of contradictions. He amassed a huge fortune while preaching the virtues of poverty. He served as an advisor to the notoriously cruel Emperor Nero, yet advocated for clemency and moderation. He's basically the ancient world's equivalent of that influencer who promotes ethical consumerism while simultaneously hawking fast fashion. Come on, bestie. Seneca believed that punishment should be corrective, not vengeful. He argued that the point wasn't to inflict pain for the sake of pain, but to help the offender understand the wrongness of their actions and, hopefully, become a better person. All cruelty springs from weakness, he wrote. It's a lovely sentiment, isn't it? So lovely you almost forget he was Nero's advisor. He also believed in the power of reason and self-control. He thought that by cultivating virtue and understanding, people could overcome their base instincts and live a more fulfilling life. Which is great, in theory. But what about the guy who just stole your tunic in the bathhouse? A strongly worded philosophical lecture might not be quite as effective as, say, having him flogged. Just saying. Now, Seneca wasn't alone in his views. Other philosophers, like Cicero, also emphasized the importance of justice and fairness. Cicero, a famous orator and politician, believed that the law should be applied equally to all citizens and that punishment should be proportionate to the crime. He's like the OG legal eagle, soaring high above the murky swamp of Roman politics and squawking about the importance of doing the right thing. Unfortunately, even Cicero ended up on the wrong side of a political power struggle and was eventually assassinated. So, maybe keep your legal eagle opinions to yourself, especially around people holding daggers. However, not everyone agreed with Seneca and Cicero's enlightened views. Many Romans believed in a more traditional, retributive approach to punishment. They thought that criminals deserved to suffer for their actions and that the state had a duty to exact revenge on behalf of the victims. This perspective was particularly strong among the military and the lower classes, who often felt vulnerable to crime and violence. Maybe they had a point, because as much as we want people to be able to repent, sometimes bad people need to be punished. It is also worth mentioning that Roman justice wasn't exactly known for its gentleness. Depending on the crime, punishment could range from a simple fine to exile, imprisonment, or even death. And let's not forget the infamous Roman games, where gladiators fought to the death for the amusement of the masses. It's all very sporting, isn't it? Although, historians still argue whether the games were primarily a form of entertainment or a way to maintain social order. Probably a bit of both, if we're being honest. Free bread and circuses, as they say. Keep the masses happy, and they're less likely to start a revolution. Speaking of unusual punishments, there was a practice known as Damnatio ad Bestias, where criminals were thrown to wild animals in the arena. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my. And if you think that sounds barbaric, well, you're not wrong. But it was also a way for the Romans to demonstrate their power and control over the natural world. It was like saying, look how civilized we are. We can even make wild animals dance to our tune. Although the animals probably weren't dancing so much as having a quick snack. Not a pleasant way to go, for sure. Although you would get to see the Colosseum up close, which is a bonus. You might wonder, what kind of crimes warranted such drastic measures? Well, treason, murder, arson, the usual suspects. But sometimes, the line between crime and political dissent could be blurry. If you dared to challenge the authority of the emperor or question the established order, you could find yourself facing some pretty serious consequences. And it probably wouldn't matter that you were advocating for the latest revolutionary diet, because who knows, they might think you're poisoning the masses. The debate about punishment in ancient Rome highlights a timeless tension between justice and mercy, between retribution and rehabilitation. Seneca and others advocated for a more humane and enlightened approach, while others clung to a more traditional, retributive view. And honestly, we're still grappling with those same questions today. What is the purpose of punishment? How do we balance the need for justice with the desire for rehabilitation? How do we ensure that the legal system is fair and equitable for all? It is no easy task, but it is one of the many things that society must wrestle with as they change. Of course, we now have things the Romans could only dream of, like rehabilitation programs, restorative justice, and the invention of lawyers, though, whether that last one is a blessing or a curse is debatable. But the fundamental ethical dilemmas remain the same. How do we create a just and compassionate society? How do we deal with those who break the law? And how do we ensure that everyone has a fair chance at a good life? So, as you continue your stroll through the forum, ponder these weighty questions. Maybe grab a snack from a street vendor, a nice piece of flatbread with some olives and cheese. You've earned it. And remember, even in the midst of all the grandeur and drama of ancient Rome, there were people who were grappling with the same moral complexities we face today. And, more importantly, try not to criticize the emperor's outfit, unless you want to end up as Lion Chow. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go ponder the mysteries of the universe over a cup of chamomile tea. Maybe I'll even write a strongly worded letter to my neighbor about their late-night toga parties. They're getting a bit out of hand. Okay, settle in, friend. Dim the lights, fluff your pillow, and let's drift back in time, shall we? Back to the land of togas, gladiators, and some truly wild ideas about justice. You trudge down a dusty Roman street. It's hot, the sun beating down on your neck. The air hangs thick with the scent of spices, sewage, and, if you're unlucky, the not-so-distant aroma of public execution. Lovely. You see a crowd gathered in the forum, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and righteous indignation. A shiver runs down your spine. Today, you are witnessing Roman justice in action, and believe me, it's not exactly an episode of Law and Order. Now, the Romans, they were all about order, right? They built roads, aqueducts, and an empire, so obviously, they needed some rules. They developed a complex legal system, the ius civil, which was surprisingly sophisticated for its time. Mainstream historical fact, the 12 tables, displayed publicly in the forum, formed the foundation of Roman law. But here's the thing, justice wasn't always, shall we say, just. The punishment often depended on your social status. If you were a wealthy patrician, you might get a slap on the wrist, metaphorically speaking, of course, actual slapping could occur, depending on the offense. But if you were a plebeian, or worse, a slave, well, let's just say things could get unpleasant. Public humiliation was a favorite. Imagine being paraded through the streets in your underwear while people threw rotten vegetables at you. Not a good look, darling. And speaking of public humiliation, ever heard of Damnatio memoriae? It's a phrase the Romans actually used. This was the ultimate eraser of a person's existence from the public record. Statues were destroyed, names were erased from inscriptions, and any mention of the person was forbidden. Basically, you were Voldemort out of history. Talk about a bad breakup. Quirky or fringe tidbit, there's a theory that some particularly vindictive Roman emperors even extended damnatio memoriae to the relatives of the condemned. Imagine being erased from history because your uncle stole a loaf of bread. Harsh. Historians still argue whether damnatio memoriae was truly effective in erasing someone from history, given that we're still talking about it, aren't we? Anyway, back to our little stroll. You glance over and see a man chained to a post, awaiting his fate. What did he do? Who knows? Maybe he insulted the emperor's new toga. Maybe he stole a chicken. Maybe he just looked at someone funny. The possibilities were endless. The range of punishments was extensive. We're talking everything from fines and exile to imprisonment, flogging, and, of course, the ever-popular crucifixion. Now, crucifixion wasn't just reserved for Jesus, you know. It was a common punishment for slaves and those accused of treason. Not a pleasant way to spend an afternoon, especially with Roman humidity. And then there were the gladiatorial games. Fun fact, gladiatorial games were originally part of funerary rites. These weren't just entertainment. Though they eventually became a spectacle of blood and gore, they started as a way to honor the dead and, perhaps, appease their spirits. You might think of it as a really intense memorial service. You're sitting there, watching these heavily armed guys hacking each other to bits, thinking, wow, Uncle Tiberius would have loved this. Now, of course, not every Roman punishment was barbaric. The Romans were also quite fond of exile. A bit like sending someone to Siberia, but with better weather and less chance of encountering a bear. But depending on where you were exiled, it could still be pretty grim. Remote islands were a popular choice. Congratulations, they'd say, you're now the governor of this rock. Quirky or fringe tidbit, some historians believe that Roman exiles actually established thriving communities on these remote islands, complete with their own miniature versions of Roman society. Talk about making the best of a bad situation. You get banished to a desert island and suddenly you're running a little toga party of your own. Historians still argue whether exile was an effective deterrent or simply a way to get rid of troublemakers without having to deal with the messier aspects of capital punishment. You know, less blood on the forum steps. You decide to wander away from the crowd, the chanting and jeering starting to give you a headache. You pass a group of scribes diligently copying legal documents. Even in a world of harsh punishments, bureaucracy reigns supreme. The Romans were meticulous record keepers. They documented everything, from land ownership to court proceedings. This attention to detail is one reason why we know so much about their legal system. They weren't just hacking people apart, they were carefully logging it all in triplicate. But let's not forget the animals. Oh, the animals. The Romans were big fans of using animals in executions. Lions, bears, and even ostriches were employed to dispatch criminals in the most gruesome way possible. It wasn't enough to just kill someone, you had to make a show of it. It was a whole new meaning to the phrase, going wild. Quirky or fringe tidbit, one theory suggests that the choice of animal was often symbolic. Lions, for example, were used to punish those who had offended the emperor's majesty, while bears were reserved for those who had committed crimes against the natural order. I guess stealing honey from a bear's den was a really serious offense. Historians still argue whether the use of animals in executions was simply a reflection of Roman bloodlust or a more calculated attempt to control the population through fear. Either way, it makes for a pretty terrifying image. You decide it's time for a glass of wine. You duck into a nearby tavern, hoping to find some respite from the grim realities of Roman justice. You order a cup of lukewarm wine and settle into a corner, trying to ignore the boisterous chatter around you. Even in the tavern, talk turns to the latest trials and tribulations. Someone is arguing about the fairness of a particular judge, while another is complaining about the exorbitant fines being levied for minor offenses. It seems that even in ancient Rome, everyone had an opinion on the legal system. You overhear someone complaining about the endless delays in the courts. Justice delayed is justice denied, he grumbles, echoing a sentiment that's probably been around since the dawn of time. You take a sip of your wine and reflect on the long shadow cast by Roman punishments on legal history. Their system, for all its flaws, laid the groundwork for many of the legal principles we still use today. Think about it, concepts like due process, the right to a defense, and the importance of written law all have their roots in Roman jurisprudence. The idea of innocent until proven guilty, while not explicitly stated in Roman law, was certainly implied in their legal procedures. They believed that the burden of proof rested on the accuser, not the accused. A revolutionary idea, really. It's easy to focus on the brutality, but it's equally important to recognize the innovations. The Romans also understood the importance of codifying laws. Putting the rules down in writing, so everyone could see them, helped to ensure a degree of consistency and transparency. Of course, interpretations could still vary wildly, and bribery was always a factor, but at least there was a foundation to work from. I can already picture the lawyers arguing over the fine print. Quirky or fringe tidbit, some historians believe that the Romans even had a rudimentary form of legal aid for the poor. While not as comprehensive as modern legal aid programs, there were mechanisms in place to help those who couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. Who knew the Romans were such bleeding hearts? Well, not really. Historians still argue whether Roman law was truly intended to protect the rights of all citizens or simply to maintain social order and protect the interests of the ruling elite. The answer, as always, is probably somewhere in between. You finish your wine and decide it's time to head home, The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city. As you walk, you can't help but think about the legacy of Roman justice. Their punishments may seem barbaric to us now, but they were a product of their time. And while we've come a long way since then, it's important to remember that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, always evolving, always striving to be better. The images of Roman justice begin to blur, the forum fading into the distance. The sounds of the city soften, the chanting and jeering replaced by a gentle hum. The air grows cooler, the scent of spices and sewage replaced by a refreshing breeze. The grip of the Roman world starts to loosen, the weight of its history slowly lifting from your shoulders. The harsh realities of Roman punishment recede, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The gladiators are gone, the lions are silent, and the scribes have put down their pens. The forum is empty, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The images become fainter, the sounds more distant, as you drift further and further away. The concept of Roman justice itself seems to dissipate, replaced by a feeling of peace and contentment. The weight of history lifts, the burden of knowledge fades, and you are left with a sense of lightness and ease. Everything is quiet now, everything is still. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Let go. Sleep now, friend. Let the worries of the day drift away like leaves on a gentle stream. Let the tension in your body melt away like snow in the spring sun. Surrender to the comforting embrace of sleep, and let your mind wander to a place of peace and serenity. You are safe, you are loved, you are at peace. Sweet dreams.